The highway stretched out like a scar through the desert, long, endless, humming softly under the old blue pickup truck. The air shimmered with heat, the kind that blurs the horizon and makes everything look like it's breathing. Emily Turner sat quietly in the passenger seat, one hand resting on her chin, her other holding a half-empty bottle of iced tea. She had just turned 18, but she didn't feel like a grown-up. She felt like someone standing at the edge of something she didn't understand. Her father, Michael Turner, 52, drove with the window cracked open, letting the hot wind whip through his gray-streaked hair. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that looked carved from years of hard work, sun-beaten skin, lines etched deep at the corners of his eyes. His denim jacket was faded, the elbows worn smooth. Once, he'd been loud, confident, even funny. But now, silence clung to him like dust. They had been driving for hours. The sky ahead burned gold, then slowly bled into orange as the sun dipped lower. "Why Sedona?" Emily finally asked, breaking the spell of the engine's rhythm. Michael's eyes stayed fixed on the road. "Your mom loved Sedona," he said. His voice was steady, but something about it felt rehearsed. "She never told me that." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "She told me plenty she didn't tell you." Emily turned her gaze to the passing fields, wide, open, and empty. "You could have picked anywhere," she murmured. "Why now?" Michael didn't answer right away. His fingers tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Because some trips can't wait anymore." The air between them grew heavier, filled with the hum of tires and the crackle of an old country song coming through the static. It was one of her mother's favorites. Soft, melancholy, the kind she used to hum while making pancakes on Sunday mornings. Emily turned the volume down, just enough for it to sound like a memory. They crossed into Arizona by dusk. The land changed color, the soil glowing deep red beneath a sky that looked too wide for the world. They pulled into a lonely gas station off the highway, a small, dusty place where the sign flickered open in tired neon. Emily stepped out, stretching her legs. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline and warm asphalt. Inside, a young man at the counter, early 20s, tattoos curling up his arms, nodded politely as she passed. She bought 2 sodas and a bag of chips, then stepped back out into the amber light of evening. Michael was leaning against the truck, cigarette in hand but unlit. He was staring at the horizon like it might speak if he stared long enough. "Didn't know you smoked again," Emily said. He blinked, looking caught. "I don't," he muttered, slipping the cigarette back into the pack. "Just thinking." "About Mom?" she asked softly. "Always." She handed him a soda, forcing a smile. "Well, here. Sugar's better for you anyway." He chuckled, the sound rough but warm. "Guess you get that stubborn streak from her." They got back on the road. The sun had dipped low now, and twilight stretched across the desert like a slow exhale. For a while, neither spoke. The road ahead glowed faintly under the truck's headlights, and the stars began to crawl out of the sky. Then, without warning, Michael pulled to the side of the highway. The truck rolled to a stop on a shoulder of cracked earth and sagebrush. Emily frowned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," he said quietly. "Just give me a minute." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wooden box. It was carved from dark cedar, smooth and worn, with a delicate leaf pattern etched along the lid. He handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked, turning it over in her hands. "Something your mom wanted you to have." His voice wavered just slightly. "She made me promise to give it to you on your 18th birthday." Emily blinked. "Then why now? We're hours from home." "Because it's not meant to be opened just anywhere," he said. "She wanted you to open it. In Sedona." Why Sedona? His eyes met hers in the dim light. Because she said that's where truth feels lighter. Emily looked down at the box again, tracing the edges with her thumb. What's in it? You'll know soon enough, Michael murmured. Then he started the truck again and eased back onto the highway. They stopped later at a diner called Marty's Grill, a glowing pink sign buzzing above the door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of bacon and old coffee. Their waitress, Linda Harper, 40, short and sturdy with tired but kind eyes, wore a pink uniform with her name stitched in red thread. She smiled when she saw them. You two look like you've been driving forever, she said in a soft southern accent. Feels like it, Michael said. Well then, she replied cheerfully. Best pie in the States waiting on you. On the house if you can guess the flavor. Emily smiled for the first time that day. Apple? Close, Linda winked. Cinnamon peach. My mama's recipe. They ate slowly. The pie was warm, sweet, and sticky with sugar. Linda refilled their coffee cups twice, humming as she worked. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like old family dinners before the world had cracked. When they finally left, the stars had scattered across the black sky like broken glass. Michael looked up at them and said quietly, Your mom loved this view. Emily followed his gaze. She really did talk about Sedona, didn't she? He nodded. Every time she looked at the stars, she said they reminded her of that place. Back in the truck, Emily held the small box against her chest as they drove through the night. She didn't know why, but it felt heavier now. And as the road curved south, toward the desert, toward the truth, she could almost hear her mother's voice in the hum of the engine, gentle, certain, whispering something she wasn't ready to understand yet. Morning came slowly, the kind of soft light that slips between curtains and whispers you awake. Emily blinked at the ceiling of the small motel room, momentarily unsure where she was. Then she remembered the long drive, the diner pie, the box resting quietly on the nightstand beside her. Outside, she could hear her father moving around, boots scuffing against gravel, the low creak of the truck door. The smell of coffee drifted in through a crack in the window. She sat up, stretching, and caught her reflection in the mirror. The girl staring back looked older than yesterday, or maybe just more awake. When she stepped outside, Michael Turner was sitting on the porch rail, hands wrapped around a steaming cup. His denim jacket hung loose over a faded t-shirt, the kind he used to wear when fixing bikes in their old driveway. The morning air painted the world in gold and blue. "Morning, kiddo," he said, voice rough but gentle. Emily smiled faintly. "You're up early." He chuckled. "Haven't really slept. Old habit." "Thinking again?" He gave her a sidelong glance. "You always ask questions like your mom." Emily sat down beside him, resting her elbows on her knees. For a moment, neither spoke. The creek behind the cabin whispered against the stones, and a bird trilled somewhere in the trees. "Sedona's not far," Michael said at last. "A couple hours if traffic's light." Emily nodded. "You ever been?" He shook his head. "No, but your mom wanted to go every year. Life got in the way." "Or maybe you did," she said quietly, not out of anger, just truth. He didn't answer. He just stared at the sky, eyes dim but far away. They packed up and hit the road again. The truck rolled past endless cliffs that rose like old cathedrals. Each mile deeper into Arizona, the land grew stranger, beautiful, but raw. Emily leaned her head against the window, watching the shapes shift. "Feels like driving through a painting," she murmured. Her father smiled faintly. Your mom would have loved that line. The closer they got to Sedona, the quieter he became. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was heavy, charged, as if both were afraid to break it. By midday, they reached the heart of town. The air shimmered with color. red stone, turquoise jewelry, laughter spilling from small cafes. Emily pressed her face to the window. Wow, this place doesn't even look real. Michael exhaled slowly. Yeah, it's something. They parked near the square, beside a row of art galleries and desert plant shops. The sign above one store read, Grace's Painted Horizons. The name alone tugged at something soft in her chest. Let's grab lunch, Michael said, his tone too casual. You pick. But as he headed down the street, Emily lingered at the window of the gallery. Inside stood a tall woman arranging canvases, early 60s, silver hair tied in a bun, long green cardigan brushed with paint stains. Her name tag read, Grace Mitchell. She looked up, and their eyes met through the glass. For a heartbeat, the woman froze, then smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Emily stepped inside. The scent of oil paint and lavender wrapped around her. Hello there, Grace said warmly, wiping her hands on a rag. You visiting Sedona? Yes, ma'am. My dad and I just drove down from Denver. Long trip, Grace mused. You must have good reason to come all this way. Emily shrugged, half smiling. Birthday trip, I guess. My dad said my mom always wanted to come here. Grace's expression softened. Your mother sounds like a woman who loved beauty. She did. Emily glanced at a painting nearby, a bright red canyon with a ribbon of water weaving through it. These are yours? Everyone, Grace replied. Been painting Sedona for 30 years. There was something kind in her voice, but beneath it, something else. Recognition, maybe. A flicker of memory she wasn't ready to reveal. You look familiar, dear, Grace said after a pause. Have we met before? Emily shook her head. No, I don't think so. Grace tilted her head. Must be the light then. Michael appeared at the doorway, clearing his throat softly. Em, ready to eat? Emily turned. Yeah, just a sec. She smiled politely at Grace. It was nice meeting you. You too, sweetheart, Grace replied. Enjoy Sedona, and take care of your father. The words landed oddly heavy. As they walked away, Emily glanced back once more. Grace was standing by the window again, watching them go, expression thoughtful, unreadable. Later that afternoon, they checked into a small riverside cabin. The place smelled faintly of cedar and rain. Emily unpacked quietly, while her father set 2 mugs on the table and poured hot tea from a flask he'd filled that morning. Pretty town, she said, folding her jacket. Friendly people. Yeah. He hesitated. Anyone stand out? She looked up, surprised. The woman at the gallery, Grace Mitchell. Why? Michael's hand paused midair. No reason, he said quickly. Then, after a moment, your mom used to paint too, you know. Emily smiled. She taught me when I was little. I was terrible. He laughed softly. You were 6. You painted the dog purple. Because he deserved it, she said, grinning. They both laughed. The sound felt good, like sunlight through a dusty window. But later, when the laughter faded, Emily noticed him staring again, past her, past the walls, to some place she couldn't see. Dad? He blinked, refocusing. Yeah? Why does it feel like you're still keeping something from me? He inhaled slowly, eyes glinting with pain. Because I am. Silence fell between them again. Only the creek outside spoke, its water slipping over stone like a secret too old to name. That night, Emily lay awake, listening to the low murmur of the wind through the canyon. She thought about Grace, about her mother's laughter, about the wooden box still resting unopened beside her bed. And though she couldn't explain why, she had the strange feeling that Sedona wasn't just a destination. It was the beginning of something she'd been running toward her whole life, without even knowing it. Night came quietly over Sedona, the cliffs glowing red, then purple, then finally fading into the kind of darkness that feels alive. The sound of the creek behind the cabin whispered through the air, steady, soft, like a lullaby that refused to end. Emily Turner sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the small wooden box resting on the table. It looked harmless, but in her chest, it felt like it was ticking. Across the room, her father sat by the fireplace. His elbows rested on his knees, hands clasped tight together, head bowed. The firelight flickered against his face, making him look older, fragile in a way she had never seen before. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "Dad, what's in the box?" Michael Turner looked up. The fire reflected in his eyes, two small burning worlds. "Your mother's letter," he said quietly, "and something else." "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. His voice trembled. "Because I didn't know if I could handle what came after." He reached for the box, hesitated, then handed it to her. His rough hands lingered for a second longer than usual, then pulled away. Emily untied the blue ribbon that held the folded letter shut. The paper was soft, yellowed at the edges. Her mother's handwriting curved across the page in gentle lines, neat but warm. She began to read. "My dearest Emily, if you're reading this, it means your father finally found the courage I always hoped he would. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you myself, sweetheart. You came into our lives as a miracle, but not in the way most people imagine. You were born in Tucson. We found you there, tiny, quiet, perfect. You were never an accident. You were chosen." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook. She read again, slower. "We couldn't have children. I wanted to adopt, but your father was scared. He thought it made him less of a man. But when I held you for the first time, everything changed. He changed too. He just didn't know how to show it. He built walls to protect his pain, and sometimes he shut you out behind them. But he loved you, Emily. More than he'll ever know how to say." The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, looking up. "Is this true?" Michael's lips pressed together. He nodded slowly. "Every word." He leaned back, rubbing his palms over his face. "Your mom, she believed love didn't need blood to be real. But his voice cracked. "I thought I'd failed her. I didn't want to face what I couldn't give." He looked at her, his eyes red but unflinching. "When she brought you home, you were 6 months old. I remember holding you for the first time. You looked up at me with those big brown eyes, and all I could think was, what if I mess this up?" Emily's voice broke. "You didn't." He shook his head. "I tried so hard not to. But grief makes people do stupid things. When your mom died, I promised her I'd tell you the truth on your 18th birthday. But I kept putting it off, every year, until now." He pointed to the second document in the box, a folded sheet with faded ink and an official seal. "That's your birth certificate." Emily's heart pounded as she lifted it out. Her name, Emily Grace Turner, was typed neatly at the top, but below, under Mother, was another name entirely, Rebecca Lawson. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. "Who is she?" Emily asked. Michael swallowed hard. "Your biological mother. She was just 20 when she had you. She wanted you to have more than she could give." Emily's hands trembled around the paper. "Did you ever meet her?" "Once," he said softly, "at the adoption home. She had kind eyes, nervous smile. She made me promise I'd take care of you, and that I'd tell you the truth one day." He looked away, ashamed. "I broke half that promise." The silence that followed felt heavy enough to crack the floor. Emily wanted to speak, but couldn't. She looked back at the letter, at her mother's words. "You were chosen." The phrase wrapped around her heart like a bandage and a blade all at once. Finally she stood, crossing the small space between them. She knelt in front of her father. His eyes widened, startled, as she took his rough hands in hers. "You didn't fail me," she said softly. You didn't fail her either. His voice broke on a whisper. I was so afraid you'd hate me for hiding it. I don't, she said. I just wish you hadn't carried it alone. For the first time in years, Michael let himself cry, not the quiet, hidden kind, but a full, shaking release that made his shoulders tremble and his breath stutter. Emily held his hand through it, feeling her own tears slip silently down her cheeks. The fire crackled softly, throwing light across the walls. It felt like her mother was there somehow, not in the room, but in the warmth, in the sound, in the stillness that followed. When the last of the tears had dried, Michael reached for the letter again, folded it carefully, and tucked it back into the box. There's one more thing, he said. He handed her a small photograph, faded, creased. In it, a young woman smiled shyly at the camera, her arm cradling a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket. That's Rebecca, he whispered, and that's you. Emily stared at the image. Something inside her shifted, grief, gratitude, confusion, all tangled together. She whispered, She looks kind. She was, Michael said. Your mom met her too. They talked for a long time. I never knew what they said, but when we left, your mom just said, She gave us the greatest gift. Emily folded the photo gently and placed it on the table beside the box. I want to know her story, she said quietly. All of it. Michael nodded. You deserve to. Outside, the wind brushed the walls of the cabin. The stars hung still over the cliffs. The truth had finally been spoken, but its echo lingered, soft and unfinished. Emily lay awake long after her father fell asleep, the letter still warm in her hands. She whispered into the dark, Thank you, Mom. And though no one answered, she felt something shift in the air, a lightness. As if somewhere beyond the canyon, her mother had finally exhaled too. Morning came soft and golden, spilling over the red cliffs like melted light. The creek behind the cabin whispered against the rocks, the sound steady and calm, like a heartbeat that had finally slowed. Emily Turner sat at the small table by the window, the letter still open in front of her. She'd read it 3 times now, each word sinking deeper, each pause between sentences cutting a little softer. Across from her, her father poured coffee into 2 mismatched mugs. The smell of it filled the room, warm, bitter, grounding. Michael Turner looked tired. Not just the kind of tired that comes from lack of sleep, but the kind that lives deep behind the eyes. He wore the same denim jacket, sleeves rolled halfway, and his hands trembled slightly as he set her mug down. You didn't sleep, Emily said quietly. He gave a faint smile. Did you? She shook her head. Didn't want to. They drank in silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel awkward anymore, just honest. After a moment, Michael leaned back, eyes fixed on the window. You remember when your mom used to paint? He asked. Emily nodded. She said it helped her think. She used to talk about color like it was emotion, he said softly. Red for love, blue for peace, yellow for hope. He paused, a wistful smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She said Sedona was all 3 at once. Emily glanced outside. The cliffs glowed like embers in the early light. She was right, she whispered. Michael took a deep breath. There's someone I want you to meet. She frowned. Who? He hesitated, eyes flicking toward the creek. A woman named Grace Mitchell. She runs a gallery in town. Your mom knew her. Emily blinked, surprised. I met her yesterday. She remembered Mom. Michael nodded slowly. They were friends. Grace helped us when we adopted you. The words hit like a quiet thunder. She knew? Yes. He set his mug down carefully. She was there the day we brought you home. Emily's breath caught. Why didn't you tell me? His voice softened. Because I didn't know how to tell you everything. All at once. He reached for his keys and stood. She lives by the creek, just outside of town. Thought maybe we could visit." Emily hesitated, her heart a steady drum in her chest. Then she nodded. "Okay." They drove through winding roads that cut between crimson cliffs and stretches of open desert. The air shimmered, heavy with sunlight and dust. When they turned down a narrow dirt path lined with juniper trees, Emily spotted a small stone cottage near the water. Wind chimes tinkled softly in the breeze. Grace Mitchell stood outside, watering a row of potted cacti. She looked almost exactly as Emily remembered. Tall, graceful, hair silver like morning mist, long cardigan the color of moss. Her expression brightened when she saw them, though her eyes softened with something more than surprise. "Michael Turner," she said, setting down the watering can. "It's been a long time." Michael smiled faintly. "Too long." Grace turned to Emily, her voice warm. "And this must be your girl. Last time I saw you, sweetheart, you could fit in one arm." Emily froze. "You held me?" Grace chuckled softly. "Just once. You were half asleep and smelled like baby powder." They followed her inside the cottage. The walls were covered with paintings, rivers, canyons, wildflowers, each glowing like it held a secret of its own. The air smelled of oil paint and peppermint tea. Grace poured 3 cups, motioned for them to sit. "I heard about Claire," she said gently. "I'm sorry for your loss." Michael nodded, his voice low. "She would have wanted you here today." "I know," Grace murmured. "She always said truth should come with kindness." Emily leaned forward. "You knew about me? Being adopted?" Grace met her gaze, calm and open. "Yes, your mother wanted it that way. She wanted people around you who loved you before you even knew who they were." Emily's voice trembled. "Did you know my biological mother too? Rebecca Lawson?" Grace hesitated for a long moment. Then she nodded. "I did." The air in the room shifted. "She was young," Grace said softly. "Barely 20. She came into my gallery one day with paint-stained hands and a sketchbook full of desert skies. Said she wanted to sell her drawings to buy bus fare. That's how I met her." Emily listened, heart pounding. Grace continued, her eyes far away. "When she found out she was pregnant, she was terrified. No family, no support. I helped her get to Tucson, where your parents were waiting. She wanted you to have a life she couldn't give." Michael lowered his gaze, his voice rough. "She asked us to send her updates, but after the first year, we stopped. Claire thought it would only hurt her more." Grace nodded sadly. "Rebecca passed away a few years later. Illness, quick, peaceful." Emily's breath hitched. "So, she's gone?" "Yes, dear," Grace said softly. "But she loved you fiercely. I still have one of her letters. She asked me to keep it just in case." She rose and walked to a wooden chest near the corner. When she returned, she held a thin envelope, yellowed with time. On the front, written in looping cursive, were the words, "For Emily, if she ever comes to Sedona." Grace handed it to her. "I think she wanted you to know. She never forgot." Emily's fingers shook as she opened it. Inside was a single page. "My little girl, if you ever read this, know that letting you go was the hardest thing I ever did, and the only right thing I could. I pray you were loved. I pray you felt safe. When life feels heavy, find water. It always finds its way home." Emily pressed the letter to her chest. Tears blurred her vision, but they were different this time. Soft, cleansing. Michael placed a hand on her shoulder. His voice was low, steady. "She was right, Em. You were loved." Emily turned to Grace, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you." Grace smiled gently. "You don't owe me thanks, sweetheart. Just live. That's what they both wanted for you." Outside, the creek shimmered in the sunlight. Emily walked toward it, the letter still in her hand. The water flowed slow and sure, glinting with reflections of the sky. She whispered, "I found you, Mom. Both of you." And for the first time since the drive began, her heart felt light, like the current had finally caught her and was carrying her home. The last evening in Sedona arrived quietly. The red cliffs glowed like burning embers beneath the setting sun, and the creek shimmered gold as it wound through the rocks. The air was warm, calm, alive. It felt like the whole desert was holding its breath. Emily Turner sat on the porch of the cabin, the letter from Rebecca folded neatly in her hands. The paper had grown soft from where she kept touching it, tracing every word, every curve of the handwriting, as if memorizing the rhythm of a voice she'd never heard. Behind her, the wooden floor creaked softly. Her father stepped out, a mug of coffee in his hand. Michael Turner looked worn but lighter, like some invisible weight had finally slipped off his shoulders. He had traded his denim jacket for an old flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up. The faint scent of cedar clung to him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said quietly. Emily smiled faintly. "Yeah, it feels different now." He sat beside her, eyes on the horizon. "Your mom used to say sunsets were God's apology for endings." Emily laughed softly. "That sounds like her." For a long time, neither spoke. The sky stretched wide and brilliant before them, gold bleeding into crimson, crimson fading to violet. The sound of cicadas rose and fell with the wind. Michael set his mug down. "Grace told me what she gave you," he said. Emily nodded, clutching the folded letter in her lap. "Yeah. Rebecca wrote it before she died." He hesitated. "I didn't know she'd left anything behind." "She wanted me to find it," Emily said. "Said I'd always have a home if I followed the water." Michael leaned back, elbows on his knees. "She would have been proud of you." Emily looked at him, eyes shining softly in the dying light. "You think so?" "I know so," he said. Silence again, but this time it was different. Not heavy, not haunted, just quiet, the kind that lets your heart breathe. After a moment, Michael spoke again, voice rough, but honest. "When your mom died, I thought I'd already lost everything. But sitting here now, I realize I almost lost you too." Emily turned toward him. "You didn't." He smiled sadly. "I came close." The breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear, watching him. "You don't have to keep apologizing, Dad." "I know," he said softly. "But I need to say it. Not because I expect forgiveness, but because I finally understand what I did wrong." She reached over and rested her hand on his arm. "You don't need to explain anymore. You did your best." Michael exhaled slowly, the air leaving his chest like a long sigh he'd been holding for years. "Maybe, but I wish I'd done better." "Then do better now," she said gently. "Start here, with me." He looked at her then, really looked, and nodded. "Okay." The sun sank lower, painting the world in molten red. The light washed over them, filling every crack that time had carved. Emily leaned against her father's shoulder, feeling his arm wrap around her in a rare, unguarded gesture. "I met her, you know," he said after a while. "Rebecca. Just once." She was quiet, nervous. But the way she looked at you... His voice broke, then steadied. "I'll never forget it." She smiled and said, "She already belongs to you." I didn't understand it then, but now I do. Emily closed her eyes, her voice soft. "I think I understand it too." For a moment neither moved. The world seemed to pause around them, the creek murmuring, the air cooling, the desert birds calling faintly in the distance. Michael cleared his throat and reached into his pocket. "There's something else I want you to have." He pulled out a small photograph, its edges worn from years of being folded and unfolded. Emily took it carefully. It was a picture of her parents, Michael and Claire, standing in front of their old house, laughing, her mom holding baby Emily, wrapped in that same yellow blanket from Rebecca's photo. Her throat tightened. "Where did you find this?" "It was in your mom's old journal," he said quietly. "She kept it hidden for safekeeping. Said she wanted you to see it when you were old enough to understand what family really means." Emily smiled through her tears. "I think I finally do." Michael's voice was soft. "Family isn't blood. It's the people who stay." She nodded. "It's the people who choose you." They sat there until the last light faded and the desert began to breathe again. A gentle wind rose from the canyon, carrying the scent of rain and sage. The stars began to flicker awake, one, then another, then 1,000 more. Emily looked up at them, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think she can see us?" Her father followed her gaze. "Both of them can," he said. "And I think they're proud we finally got here." Emily smiled, leaning into him. The creek below them caught the starlight, glimmering like a ribbon of silver winding through the dark. For the first time since her mother's death, her heart felt steady, anchored not in loss, but in understanding. She whispered, "Thank you, Dad." He squeezed her hand gently. "No, kiddo. Thank you." The wind shifted. The stars shimmered brighter, and for a fleeting moment it felt like both women, Claire and Rebecca, were standing somewhere just beyond the horizon, smiling. Father and daughter sat together under the vast Arizona sky, the red cliffs fading to black behind them. Tomorrow, they would drive back to Denver. But tonight, they just breathed. Together. And somewhere in that silence, between grief and forgiveness, between endings and beginnings, they finally found peace.